A decade ago, if you were out buying a car, China was basically barely a blip on your radar, right?
Oh, absolutely. Like
Yeah.
completely off the radar for most people in the West.
Yeah, but fast forward to today, and it's a completely different universe. I mean, just look at a single Chinese company, BYD. They just delivered over 4.6 million vehicles in 1 year. And, to put that into perspective for you listening, that basically matches the entire global sales of legacy giants. We're talking Ford or Honda.
Right. It's staggering. And if you zoom out and look at the broader picture for 2025, global EV production topped 22 million units. And China built roughly 75% of them.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's about 16 million electric vehicles rolling off their assembly lines, while much of the legacy automotive world is still sort of scrambling, trying to figure out their basic battery supply chains. They aren't just participating in the EV transition. I mean, they're completely dictating the pace of it.
Which is exactly why we're doing this deep dive today. We are going to look under the hood at how they built this massive 30% cost advantage based on this incredible report we have today, the Inside Track. China's global EV dominance. We really want to explore exactly what this tectonic shift means for you, whether you're a consumer, an investor, or just someone trying to navigate your career in this wild landscape.
Yeah, because I think the common assumption in the West is that, these cheap EVs just flooded the market overnight out of nowhere.
Right, like it was just this sudden explosion. But based on the report, we're actually looking at a highly calculated quarter-century leapfrog strategy.
Exactly. You really have to rewind the tape to like the late 90s and early 2000s to see the genesis of all this.
Yeah.
The architect behind much of this early vision was an engineer named Gang. And he had actually worked for Audi in Germany for over a decade. So he knew the legacy system inside and out. And he made this highly pragmatic, almost brutal pitch to the Chinese State Council. He pointed out that Detroit, Munich, Tokyo, Tehran, they all had a 100-year head start on internal combustion engines.
Which, if you think about it, are essentially thousands of moving parts containing millions of tiny controlled explosions.
Right. And the West had spent a century perfecting that precision engineering. The gearbox tolerances, the engine block metallurgy, the fluid dynamics.
It's an incredible moat.
It is. And Gang argued that if China tried to compete on gas-powered cars, they would just be building, license-built knockoffs forever. They could never catch up on a century of mechanical refinement.
Yeah.
So his philosophy is that if you want to overtake someone on a curve, you can't just drive faster on the exact same path.
You have to take the inside track.
Exactly. You shift entirely to electric drivetrains. You replace those thousands of moving engine parts with basically an electric motor, an inverter, and a battery pack.
Which completely flattens the mechanical complexity barrier that the West had spent a century building.
Spot on. That shift completely neutralized the historical advantages of Western automakers. And because of this strategic pivot, EV technology was added directly to China's high-tech 863 program back in 2001. That made it a massive state priority.
Wow, 2001.
Yeah, early. But we should probably clarify that the motivations behind this weren't initially some noble environmental crusade to save the planet.
Right, right. The report makes it clear it was a trifecta of much more, let's say, practical motivations. First, national security. I mean, China was importing 60 to 70% of its oil.
Huge vulnerability.
Massive. Moving to electricity meant they could power their transportation network with domestic coal, hydro, and solar. And then second, public health. The smog in major cities was causing severe public outcry and, massive healthcare costs.
Yeah, the air quality issues were critical back then.
And third, industrial hegemony. They saw a greenfield industry and wanted to secure a dominant position before anyone else woke up to the opportunity.
Right. The realization was that whoever controlled the battery supply chain would essentially become the Saudi Arabia of the 21st century.
It's like realizing you can't beat a grandmaster at chess, so instead you convince them to play a brand new video game where nobody knows the rules yet. You just completely change the arena.
That is a perfect analogy.
But, having a vision is one thing. I remember seeing early Chinese EVs around 2012, and they were small, plastic, short-range runabouts. They weren't great.
No, they were glorified golf carts in a lot of cases.
Right. So bridging the gap from those early iterations to the luxury high-tech sedans we see today, that requires some serious industrial maneuvering.
It does. And they utilized a really classic two-phase industrial policy, basically carrots and sticks.
Okay, let's break that down.
So the carrots started around 2009 with the 10 Cities program. They pumped about $30 billion in direct subsidies over a decade. But they started by subsidizing electric buses and taxis, just to guarantee volume for these infant battery makers. Yeah, but they didn't just hand out blank checks. This is key. The subsidies were strictly tied to performance metrics.
Meaning a manufacturer only got paid if they proved they were continually improving, like range and battery energy density.
Exactly. If your technology stagnated, you starved. The subsidies dried up. That forced relentless innovation across the whole domestic sector. And then, in 2017, came the stick, the dual credit system.
Okay, this policy is what actually caught me off guard in the report because it completely inverted how the auto industry usually operates.
Yeah, it's wild.
If you were building gas-guzzling cars, you accrued negative credits and were heavily penalized by the state. And to avoid those penalties, you had to buy positive credits from the EV makers. So legacy automakers were essentially forced to directly finance their own startup rivals.
It was a massive wealth transfer from the old guard to the new innovators. I mean, it literally forced joint ventures with Western companies to subsidize the very domestic brands that would eventually overtake them.
But wait, I'm struggling with the logic on their next major move.
Oh, the 2019 decision.
Yeah, they spent billions propping up this domestic EV market, right? Just to turn around in 2019 and invite Tesla, their most advanced competitor globally, into Shanghai with zero local joint venture requirements. I mean, that was historically unheard of in China and sounds like industrial suicide. Why invite the apex predator into your own pond?
Because of a calculated risk known as the catfish effect.
A catfish effect.
Yeah. So picture a tank of lazy fish. You throw in an aggressive predator, the catfish, and it makes all the local fish swim faster to survive. Beijing saw their domestic makers getting a bit complacent on those generous subsidies, so they threw Tesla into the pond.
Oh, wow.
But the catch was that Tesla had to localize 100% of its supply chain within a few years.
Which means Tesla had to bring in their top engineers to teach Chinese suppliers how to build components to world-class tolerances.
Exactly. Tesla essentially audited and upgraded the entire local manufacturing base. That single decision transformed the Yangtze River Delta into the Silicon Valley of auto manufacturing.
That's brilliant, actually.
It really is. Local suppliers leveled up overnight to meet Tesla's demands for things like gigacasting and precision electronics. And once those suppliers achieved that scale and quality, they turned around and started supplying those exact same hyper-efficient parts to domestic rivals, companies like NIO, XPeng, and BYD.
Which completely explains this massive 20 to 30% cost advantage Chinese EVs have over Western cars today. Because, when people see a price gap that big on a showroom floor, the immediate assumption is usually just, oh, it's cheap labor.
Right. That is the most common myth we see, and it is definitively busted by this report. In modern, highly automated auto manufacturing, labor accounts for less than 10% of the total vehicle costs.
Less than 10%.
Less than 10. The real advantage is built on three distinct pillars, starting with vertical integration. And BYD is the ultimate case study here. I mean, they didn't even start as a car company.
Right. They started in 1995 making rechargeable batteries for, mobile phones, Motorola, Nokia.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They applied consumer electronics supply chain logic to building cars. Today, their vertical integration is just staggering. They make their own microchips, their own electric motors, their own seats.
I read they even bought their own massive car carrier ships to export the vehicles.
They did. In traditional auto manufacturing, you pay a 15% profit margin to a middleman at every single step of the supply chain. BYD cuts all of that out, which just causes their baseline cost to plummet.
It's like a restaurant that doesn't just cook the meal, but owns the farm, builds the delivery trucks, and paves the roads to your house.
That's exactly how they operate.
So what is the second pillar driving this cost down?
Supply chain density. The battery makes up 30 to 40% of an EV's cost. And while the West spent the last 2 decades focused on software and financial services, China was out buying up mines and refining capacity globally.
Right.
Today, they control 60 to 90% of the refining for critical materials. We're talking about lithium, cobalt, graphite. And because every node of that supply chain, from refining the raw lithium to packing the battery cell to assembling the chassis, sits within a few hundred miles of their assembly plants, their logistics costs drop to near zero.
And that leads into the third pillar, which gets into the actual chemistry of the batteries themselves. This is the battle between NMC and LFP chemistries, right?
Yes, exactly. So Western automakers leaned heavily into NMC batteries. That's nickel, manganese, cobalt. Now, NMC offers great energy density, meaning you can pack a lot of power into a small space. But they rely on really volatile supply chains for nickel and cobalt. They are expensive, and the chemistry can be thermally unstable due to oxygen release if the cell is damaged.
Meaning they are more prone to catching fire.
Right. Meanwhile, China spent a decade mastering LFP lithium iron phosphate. LFP uses cheap, highly abundant iron. It doesn't use expensive nickel or cobalt at all. The molecular bonds are incredibly strong, making it highly stable, and the batteries last for like 3,000 to 5,000 charge cycles without degrading.
But wait, the traditional downside of LFP was always weight, right? Like the batteries were bulky and less energy dense, making it really hard to get a car 300 miles on a single charge.
That was the conventional wisdom, yeah. Until Chinese companies like BYD and CATL introduced structural packing. BYD's Blade battery is a perfect example of this. In older designs, individual battery cells were put into these heavy protective metal modules, and those modules were then packed into the car. BYD just completely eliminated those heavy module casings.
So by removing the heavy protective casings around individual cells and using the battery itself as a load-bearing structural part of the car's frame, they stripped out hundreds of pounds of dead weight.
Exactly. And less vehicle weight means you get more miles out of a cheaper, less energy-dense battery. They managed to match the range of the expensive NMC batteries at a 30% lower cost simply by rethinking the physical architecture.
That is just incredible engineering. But building a cheap, efficient car is one thing, right? It doesn't sell if consumers don't actually want to sit in it. And the consumer experience and where the definition of a car is fundamentally shifting right now.
Oh, totally. The paradigm is moving from a mechanical vehicle to essentially a smartphone on wheels. Young consumers today, particularly in the domestic Chinese market, they are not prioritizing a brand's 80-year heritage or like the sound of an exhaust note.
Right. They don't care about the roar of V8.
Not at all. They view the car as a smart, connected device.
And the tech crossover in these cars is extensive. I mean, reading the source material, we're seeing seamless integration with platforms like WeChat, onboard karaoke systems, AI voice assistants that can literally adjust individual seat climates based on who is sitting where, and these massive multi-screen digital cockpits.
Look at Xiaomi's SU7 electric sedan. Xiaomi is fundamentally a tech giant, right? A smartphone maker.
Yeah.
They designed their car from scratch so that the moment you sit in it, the vehicle instantly syncs with every smartphone, tablet, and smart home appliance in your personal ecosystem. The user interface on the dashboard is identical to the phone in your pocket.
Which raises a really critical question for anyone looking at the industry right now. If the primary battleground is the digital ecosystem inside the cabin, are legacy automakers, whose DNA is deeply rooted in mechanical engineering, are they effectively trying to compete against tech giants now?
Yes. And the companies struggling the most right now are the ones treating software as like an afterthought to the hardware rather than the core operating system of the vehicle. If your digital ecosystem is clunky, the consumer will walk away, regardless of how perfectly the suspension is tuned.
It makes sense. So this combination of tech supremacy and just brutal cost efficiency, it's sending shockwaves globally. How does the global market process high-tech EVs that are priced under $10,000?
Well, domestically in China, it has triggered an absolute bloodbath of a price war. You have over 100 EV brands fighting for survival. And companies like BYD have dropped the price of entry-level models like the Seagull and Chin series below that $10,000 USD mark.
That's wild. Under 10 grand for a new EV.
Yeah. And that move just forces bare-bone margins across the entire industry. Only the hyper-efficient will survive a margin crush like that.
And globally, this creates some pretty stark contrasts in who benefits and who doesn't.
Definitely. Consumers in developing markets across Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asia are getting unprecedented access to cheap, reliable, high-tech mobility. And honestly, that's also a massive accelerant for global grid decarbonization.
But on the flip side,
the pressure lands squarely on traditional Western legacy automakers, workers assembling internal combustion engines, and nations heavily reliant on crude oil exports.
which brings us to the geopolitical response, because we are seeing a massive reaction. The U.S. has implemented 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs, and the EU recently instituted countervailing tariffs to offset state subsidies. Now, just looking at the facts of these policies.
Right. These tariffs serve as mechanisms to protect domestic automotive industries. They're designed to buy Western companies time to scale their own EV supply chains without being undercut. However, if you analyze the trade flows in the report, it suggests these barriers might only delay the broader market shift rather than stop it entirely.
Wait, why wouldn't a 100% tariff stop the influx? I mean, that doubles the price of the car.
Because the expansion is already bypassing those borders. China commands over 50% of the Southeast Asian EV market already, and these companies are actively transitioning into true multinational corporations. They aren't just shipping cars from Shanghai anymore.
I see.
They are building massive local factories in places like Hungary, Mexico, and Brazil to produce vehicles directly within those tariff walls.
Which really highlights the blurry lines of globalization today. Like if a Chinese company builds a massive assembly plant in Hungary and the vehicle rolls off the line there using local labor, is it technically a European car or a Chinese car?
Exactly.
Tariffs assume neat, tidy borders, but multinational corporations are explicitly designed to cross them.
It forces us to question what domestic manufacturing even means in the 21st century, especially when the intellectual property and the capital originate elsewhere, but the physical assembly happens in your backyard.
It's a huge shift. So with all these geopolitical chess pieces moving so rapidly, let's talk about the future. How does this tectonic shift actually impact you, the listener, over the next decade? When we project this out, the report outlines 4 distinct scenarios playing out globally.
Yeah, so the first scenario is a best-case global green acceleration.
Okay.
In this world, trade remains relatively open, tech licensing flows freely across borders, prices fall universally. And as a result, global oil demand drops dramatically, potentially by 5 million barrels a day by 2030.
That would be massive. But the second scenario is categorized as the most likely outcome, right? A bifurcated world.
Yes. In this scenario, the global market essentially splits in two. You have a high-priced, heavily protected Western zone where consumers pay a premium for domestic EVs, and then you have an open global South dominated by cheap, high-tech Chinese platforms.
Wow. And then there's the worst case scenario.
Right. So the worst case is that escalating trade wars lead to export bans on critical minerals. China controls refining for materials like gallium, which is essential for high-power chips used in EV inverters, as well as lithium.
So if they restrict those exports in retaliation to tariffs,
It physically throttles the ability of Western companies to build batteries and solar panels. It could stall the entire green transition for a decade.
that is a scary thought. And finally, the wild card scenario.
The wild card is Chinese autonomous robotaxis. We're talking tech companies like Baidu or Huawei disrupting personal car ownership entirely. Instead of buying a car, consumers simply hail a cheap autonomous pod for cents on the mile, which completely upends the traditional automotive business model worldwide.
So how do we make all this actionable? If you're listening to this trying to map out your career or your investments, how do you navigate this landscape? Let's start with students.
If you are an engineering student today, the value is shifting rapidly away from traditional mechanical engineering. The focus really needs to be on power electronics, battery chemistry, embedded systems, and supply chain geopolitics.
Because the future isn't about perfecting piston timing anymore. It's about efficiently managing high voltages between a battery pack and an electric motor. Honestly, if you're an engineering student today focusing solely on building a slightly better gas combustion engine, it's like deciding you want to become a master typewriter repairman in 1995. The world has just moved on.
It really has.
What about current auto workers?
The transition requires rapid upskilling. Workers moving off traditional transmission assembly lines need to learn high-voltage battery repair and complex thermal management systems. They need to understand how to keep these massive, energy-dense battery packs operating at optimal temperatures safely.
And for the entrepreneurs and investors listening.
Look, the barrier to entry for building a new car company to compete on scale with BYD is virtually insurmountable right now. Don't try to build a car company.
Right.
The opportunity lies in building the supporting infrastructure. We need expansive charging networks, battery recycling facilities to reclaim those critical minerals locally, and advanced fleet management software.
That makes total sense. The ecosystem around the car. So to recap everything we've unpacked today, the vehicle parked in your driveway 10 years from now, no matter what badge is on the hood, has been shaped by a calculated quarter-century leapfrog strategy executed half a world away.
Yes.
And we are looking at a near future where solid-state batteries could make 800-mile ranges standard, while legacy automakers face bankruptcy or, frankly, acquisition by tech giants.
The pace of change is accelerating far beyond the typical industrial cycle. It's unlike anything we've seen in automotive history.
But I want to leave you with one final concept from the report that pushes the timeline even further out. We've talked a lot about the cars themselves, but the ultimate endgame might be the eventual death of the car company entirely.
Right, the total convergence of the transportation and the energy sectors.
Exactly. Imagine a world where millions of autonomous electric vehicles aren't just moving people from point A to point B. What if they act as a massive, distributed, mobile power grid?
It's a fascinating concept.
A fleet that literally backs up human civilization, feeding power back into our homes and cities during peak demand or emergencies when they aren't driving. At that point, the line between an automaker and an energy utility vanishes completely.
It reframes a vehicle from a mode of personal transport into critical public infrastructure.
It really does. It's something to mull over the next time you see an EV silently glide past you on the street. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the inside track of the global auto industry. We hope this gave you a clearer view of the road ahead. Until next time, stay curious and stay ahead of the signal.